The golden dust motes danced in the afternoon light as Maya wiped down the crystal windowsills of the Emperor's private chambers. She had learned to move quietly in this palace of giants, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished stone floors. 3 months had passed since she arrived on Paraxis Prime, and she still marveled at the alien beauty surrounding her. Emperor Thaxion watched from the shadows of his alcove, his massive form hidden behind the carved pillars that supported the vaulted ceiling. At nearly 30 feet tall when fully upright, he could have crushed the small human with a single claw, yet something about her intrigued him. Unlike the other servants who trembled and stumbled in his presence, this one moved with calm purpose. Maya had no idea she was being observed. She focused on her work, carefully cleaning each surface with the dedication she once brought to her job at the Natural History Museum back on Earth. That felt like a lifetime ago, before the Galactic Council decided humanity needed to contribute more to interstellar society. Most humans were assigned to mining operations or factory work, but a few with gentle temperaments were selected for domestic service. Maya had been grateful for the assignment, even if it meant leaving everything she knew behind. The Dragon Emperor shifted slightly, his scales catching the light. He had ruled the Pyraxis Dominion for over 800 years, commanding fleets that could reduce entire worlds to ash. Yet this tiny creature, barely reaching his ankle, showed no fear. She had even smiled at him once when he passed through the corridors, a genuine expression of polite acknowledgement that had surprised him more than any military victory. Today would be different. Today, he would test her true nature. Thaxion had grown tired of the constant scheming and greed that surrounded court life. Dragon nobles competed endlessly for his favor, offering false loyalty in exchange for territory and riches, even his own. Advisors saw him primarily as a source of power and wealth. But humans were different, or so the reports claimed. They were supposedly driven by the same base desires as other species, just weaker and more primitive in their execution. He wanted to know the truth. Maya finished with the windows and moved to dust the ornate furniture. Each piece was carved from rare woods imported from distant worlds, inlaid with precious metals and gems. She treated them with the same careful attention she gave to everything else, running her cloth along every curve and detail. Her movements were efficient but never rushed, and she paused occasionally to admire a particularly beautiful carving or pattern. The Emperor had positioned himself where he could see her reaction when she discovered what he had prepared. His personal treasure vault, sealed by quantum locks that required his DNA and mental signature to open, stood slightly ajar. The massive door, carved from a single block of midnight crystal, had been left open just enough for someone to slip inside. Within that vault lay the accumulated wealth of centuries. Rare crystals that could power entire cities, ancient artifacts from civilizations that had risen and fallen before most current species had even discovered fire, and jewelry that could purchase whole star systems. The crown of eternal flame alone was worth more than the gross domestic product of 100 worlds. Maya approached the sitting area near the vault, her duster in hand. She cleaned the low table where the Emperor sometimes reviewed reports. Then, the chairs where visiting dignitaries sat. All the while, the slightly open vault door loomed in her peripheral vision. Thaxion held his breath. This was the moment. He had tested others this way before, though never a human. Some had been too frightened to approach, while others had been unable to resist the temptation. A few had tried to steal something small, thinking it would not be missed. None had passed his test completely. Maya paused in her dusting and looked, directly at the vault door. Thaxion tensed, ready to see fear, greed, or both flicker across her features. Instead, her expression showed only mild curiosity, the same look she might give to an interesting painting or sculpture. She walked closer to the door, but made no move to push it open further or peer inside. Instead, she simply stood there for a moment, as if considering something. Then she shrugged slightly and returned to her work. The Dragon Emperor blinked in confusion. That was not the reaction he had expected. Over the next hour, Maya continued cleaning the chamber. She dusted the bookcases filled with ancient texts, polished the mirror that reflected starlight from the palace's highest tower, and swept the areas where dragon claws had tracked in dust from the courtyards. Several times her work brought her near the vault, but she showed no increased interest in it. When she finished her assigned tasks, Maya gathered her supplies and prepared to leave. She glanced once more at the vault door, and for a moment Thaxion thought she might succumb to curiosity or temptation. Instead, she walked over and examined the door frame carefully. "The seal isn't engaged properly," she murmured to herself, in the common trade language most palace staff used. The moisture from cleaning might damage something inside. To Thaxion's amazement, Maya gently pushed the door until it clicked fully closed, ensuring the automatic locks would engage. She tested the handle to make sure it was secure, then nodded in satisfaction. The Emperor remained frozen in his hiding place long after Maya had left the chamber. In 800 years of rule, no one had ever done what she just did. She had not only resisted the temptation to steal or explore where she did not belong, but had actually taken steps to protect his treasures from potential harm. His test had revealed something, but not what he had expected to learn. Maya had shown neither fear nor greed when faced with unimaginable wealth. Instead, she had displayed something far rarer in his experience: genuine care for something that was not hers, simply because it was the right thing to do. Thaxion emerged from his hiding place and walked to the vault door. His claws traced the smooth crystal surface as he considered what he had witnessed. Perhaps there was more to humans than the report suggested. Perhaps this small creature possessed something that his own people had forgotten in their pursuit of power and dominion. Tomorrow, he decided, he would try the test again. But this time, he would watch even more carefully. Starlight filtered through the crystal dome above as Maya entered the Emperor's chambers for the 4th consecutive day. She had noticed the pattern now, though she said nothing to anyone about it. Each morning when she arrived to clean, the vault door stood slightly open. Each evening when she finished, she gently closed it to prevent dust or moisture from entering. She assumed the Emperor was testing the door's locking mechanism, or perhaps the automatic sensors were malfunctioning. Maya had worked in enough old buildings to know that even the most advanced systems sometimes needed adjustment. The responsible thing was to ensure the door sealed properly, regardless of why it kept opening. Emperor Thaxion had positioned himself in different locations each day, studying her reactions from every possible angle. Dragon vision was sharp, enough to detect micro-expressions and subtle body language that other species might miss. He had become something of an expert at reading the emotions of those around him, a skill essential for political survival. But Maya remained an enigma on. The first day, she had shown only mild curiosity. On the second, she had seemed slightly concerned about the door's apparent malfunction. By the third day, she had developed a routine of checking that it sealed properly before leaving. Now, on the 4th day, something different happened. Maya was dusting the carved bookshelf that stood adjacent to the vault when she noticed something glittering on the floor near the partially opened door. A small shard of crystal, no bigger than her thumb, had apparently fallen from inside and lay just outside the threshold. Thaxion watched intently as she picked up the fragment. It was a piece of a much larger gem, probably broken off when he had moved things around inside the vault to better observe her reactions. The shard itself was worth more than most beings would see in a lifetime, but Maya examined it with the eye of someone who appreciated craftsmanship rather than cost. She held it up to the light, admiring how it split the starlight into rainbow patterns across the wall. For a moment, Her expression showed the same wonder he had seen when she looked at the palace's architectural details or the intricate carvings that decorated his chambers. Then she did something that made Thaxion's breath catch in his throat. Maya walked to the vault door and pushed it open just wide enough to slip inside. The Emperor's heart raced. Finally, she had succumbed to curiosity or temptation. He would learn what humans truly were beneath their facade of innocence. He shifted position to get a better view of the vault's interior, expecting to see her filling her pockets with treasure or standing frozen in overwhelmed greed. Instead, he saw Maya walking slowly among the displays of wealth, the small crystal shard still in her hand. But she was not grabbing anything or stuffing items into her cleaning supplies. She was looking around with the same expression she wore when examining the palace's artwork, a mixture of appreciation and careful attention to detail. The vault was enormous, designed to accommodate Thaxion's massive frame, so Maya looked even smaller inside it. Shelves and display cases towered above her, filled with the accumulated treasures of centuries. But instead of being intimidated or overwhelmed, she seemed to be studying the arrangement with a critical eye. She approached a display case containing ancient ceremonial weapons and frowned slightly. Several of the pieces were positioned awkwardly, their significance diminished by poor presentation. Maya set down her cleaning supplies and began carefully adjusting the arrangement, moving each piece to catch the light better and show off its craftsmanship. Thaxion watched in fascination as she worked. Maya handled each priceless artifact with the same care she showed everything else, but her movements revealed knowledge he had not expected. She positioned a ritual dagger so its inscribed blade would be clearly visible, turned a ceremonial spear to display its jeweled head, and arranged a set of throwing stars in a pattern that emphasized their balanced design. When she finished with the weapons display, Maya moved to a shelf containing rare crystals. Here, too, she made subtle adjustments, turning each specimen to show its best facets and creating small groupings that highlighted their different properties. A cluster of blue gems that pulsed with inner light were arranged to complement the steady glow of white crystals nearby. The Emperor realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. Maya was not stealing or even coveting his treasures. She was curating them, treating his hoard like the museum collection it essentially was. Her movements showed respect for the objects themselves, not their monetary value. She worked for nearly an hour, making small improvements throughout the vault. Some adjustments were purely aesthetic, while others seemed designed to protect the artifacts from damage. She moved a delicate glass sculpture away from where someone might bump into it and repositioned a collection of ancient scrolls to prevent them from being crushed by heavier items. Finally, Maya returned to where she had started, still holding the small crystal shard. She looked around the vault until she found where it belonged, a larger crystal formation that had a small chip missing from one edge. She carefully fitted the piece back into place, where it fused seamlessly with the parent crystal. Then she gathered her cleaning supplies and prepared to leave the vault. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at her work. Thaxion saw satisfaction in her expression, the same look she wore when she finished cleaning a room perfectly. She closed the vault door carefully and tested it to make sure it sealed properly, just as she had done every other day. For the remainder of her time in his chambers, Maya continued her normal cleaning routine. She showed no signs of excitement, guilt, or fear. She had spent an hour among treasures that could buy entire worlds, had handled artifacts that were older than most civilizations, and then simply returned to dusting furniture as if nothing unusual had happened. When Maya finally left the chambers, Thaxion remained in his hiding place for a long time. He had learned something profound about humans today, something that challenged everything he thought he knew about lesser species. Maya had not seen his vault as a treasury to be plundered or even as a display of power to be envied. She had seen it as a collection that deserved proper care and presentation. Her actions showed knowledge, skill, and above all, respect for the objects themselves rather than their value. That evening, Thaxion entered his vault for the first time in weeks. Maya's improvements were subtle but unmistakable. Every piece was displayed to better advantage, and the overall effect was stunning. His hoard had been transformed from a simple accumulation of wealth into something that truly showcased the beauty and significance of each item. He found himself seeing his own treasures with new eyes, appreciating details that had been obscured by careless arrangement. A set of jewelry from a long-dead empress caught the light in ways that revealed intricate engravings he had never noticed. Ancient books were positioned, so their illuminated covers were clearly visible, turning them from mere repositories of knowledge into works of art. For the first time in centuries, Emperor Thaxion felt something he had almost forgotten: wonder at beauty for its own sake, rather than satisfaction at possessing something others could not have. Tomorrow, he decided, the vault would remain open again. But now he wanted to see what else this remarkable human might do. The great hall echoed with the harsh voices of the dragon nobles as they argued among themselves. Lord Vorthak's scales gleamed black in the torchlight as he gestured dramatically with his massive claws, while Lady Sorrentha's golden form coiled around one of the pillars that supported the vaulted ceiling. The monthly court gathering had taken an unexpected turn when Duke Razeth noticed something different about the Emperor's vault. "I tell you, something has been disturbed," Razeth hissed, his red eyes glowing with indignation. "The arrangements have changed. Items have been moved. There is only one explanation." Emperor Thaxion sat upon his throne of carved obsidian, his expression carefully neutral as he listened to the accusations. For 2 weeks now, he had continued leaving his vault open, and Maya had continued her quiet work of improving the displays. Each day brought small changes that enhanced the collection's beauty, but he had not expected other dragons to notice. "The human servant has obviously been stealing," Lady Sorrentha declared, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Why else would anything be moved? We should execute her immediately as an example to the other servants." "Stealing seems unlikely," Lord Vorthak rumbled thoughtfully. "If she were taking things, items would be missing, not rearranged. But the fact remains that a human has touched sacred artifacts without permission. The penalty for such presumption is death." The other nobles voiced their agreement with roars and hisses that made the crystal windows vibrate. In dragon culture, touching another's hoard without explicit permission was among the gravest possible offenses. That a member of a servant species had done so was unthinkable. Thaxion felt a strange tightness in his chest as he listened to their demands for Maya's execution. 2 weeks of observation had shown him something remarkable about human nature, something that challenged his understanding of what made a being worthy of respect. But tradition and politics demanded he consider his nobles' concerns. "Bring the human before us," he commanded, his voice cutting through the angry discussions. Maya entered the great hall flanked by 2 dragon guards, each one large enough to carry her in a single claw. She walked steadily, despite being in a room full of beings who could destroy her without effort. Her simple work dress looked shabby among the gleaming scales and precious metals that decorated the dragon court, but she held her head high. Thaxion studied her face as she approached his throne. He saw no fear, no guilt, no defiance, only the same calm dignity she showed when going about her daily work. "Human!" Duke Razeth snarled, his massive head lowering until he was eye-level with Maya. "You stand accused of violating the Emperor's private vault. Items have been moved and rearranged. What do you say to these charges?" Maya looked up at the assembled dragons without flinching. "I have touched nothing that was not meant to be touched," she said quietly. "If items have been moved, it was only to display them more appropriately." The hall erupted in roars of outrage. Several nobles lunged forward, stopped only by Thaxion's raised claw. "Display them appropriately?" Lady Sorrentha's voice dripped with venom. "You presume to judge," How the Emperor's treasures should be arranged. You, a servant, dare to suggest you know better than your masters? I don't claim to know better, Maya replied calmly. I only know that beautiful things deserve to be shown in ways that honor their beauty. When I worked at the museum on Earth, we learned that proper presentation helps people appreciate the significance of important objects. Museum? Lord Vorthak tilted his enormous head. You worked at a museum. I was a curator, Maya said simply. I specialized in displaying historical artifacts and works of art so that visitors could learn from them and appreciate their cultural significance. The dragons fell silent, processing this unexpected information. In their society, the only humans they encountered were domestic servants, laborers, and soldiers. The concept of a human with professional expertise in managing collections of valuable objects was foreign to them. Thaxion leaned forward on his throne. "Show us what you have done," he commanded. The entire court processed to the Emperor's chambers, where the vault door stood open as it had for the past weeks. One by one, the dragon nobles entered the treasury, their massive forms crowding the space as they examined Maya's work. The silence stretched as they took in the transformed displays. Lord Vorthak studied the weapons collection, noting how each piece was positioned to showcase its craftsmanship. Lady Sorrentha coiled around the crystal formations, her golden scales reflecting the enhanced light patterns Maya's arrangements had created. This crystal, Duke Razeth said slowly, pointing to a large blue gem that pulsed with inner fire. I remember when you acquired it, my lord. It was impressive then, but now... He trailed off, seeming unable to find words. Now it sings, Lady Sorrentha whispered. The arrangement makes it sing with light. Maya stepped forward, her voice respectful, but confident. That crystal contains trace elements that create phosphorescence when arranged near the white crystals on the adjacent shelf. The interaction wasn't visible in its previous position, but moving it just a few feet revealed the natural light show. She moved through the vault, explaining the reasoning behind each change she had made. The ceremonial armor was positioned to show the flow of its design. The ancient scrolls were arranged by age and origin, creating a timeline of civilization. The jewelry was grouped to demonstrate different metalworking techniques from across the galaxy. Each piece tells a story, Maya continued. When they're arranged randomly, you only see individual objects. When they're curated properly, you see the connections between them, the history they represent, the cultures that created them. Emperor Thaxion watched his nobles as they listened to Maya's explanations. He saw their expressions change from anger to confusion to something approaching wonder. These were beings who had spent centuries accumulating wealth and power. But Maya was showing them how to truly see what they possessed. The small crystal you found, she said, addressing the Emperor directly. It belonged to this formation here. When I first saw it on the floor, I thought it might be important to someone, so I put it back where it belonged. Duke Razeth's massive head swung toward Thaxion. You knew about this? You allowed her access to your vault? Before Thaxion could respond, Maya spoke again. I don't think the door was meant to be open. I think there might be a malfunction with the locking system. That's why I always made sure it sealed properly when I finished cleaning. Moisture from the air could damage some of the organic materials inside. The dragons stared at her in astonishment. Even now, facing possible execution for her actions, Maya was concerned about protecting treasures that belonged to someone else. Lord Vorthak rose to his full height, his black scales rippling. Human, he said formally, do you understand what you have done? Maya looked up at him steadily. I hope I've helped preserve some beautiful and important things for future generations to appreciate. If I've done something wrong, I apologize, but I would do it again. Things of beauty and historical significance deserve to be treated with respect. The great hall was silent, except for the sound of massive lungs breathing. Thaxion felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he had not experienced in centuries. This small being, facing death for her actions, showed no regret for trying to honor and protect things that meant nothing to her personally, but everything to the culture that created them. "Human," he said softly. "What is your name?" "Maya, your Imperial Majesty." "Maya," he repeated, tasting the unfamiliar human sound. "You have taught us something today. You have shown us the difference between possessing beauty and truly seeing." The Emperor rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the vault. "Maya of Earth, curator of treasures, you are no longer a servant in this palace. You are appointed as keeper of the Imperial collection, with full authority to preserve and display our cultural heritage as you see fit." The dragon nobles erupted in shocked roars, but Thaxion silenced them with a gesture. "Look around you," he commanded. "Look at what she has accomplished in just 2 weeks. We have been blind to the true value of what we possess, seeing only wealth where we should have seen wonder." Maya stood in the center of the vault, surrounded by towering dragons who had moments before been calling for her death. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I won't disappoint you." Emperor Thaxion felt an unfamiliar moisture gathering in his own eyes as he looked down at this remarkable human. In testing her character, he had discovered something precious that he had not even known he was missing: the ability to appreciate beauty for its own sake, to care for things simply because they deserved care, to find meaning in preservation rather than possession. For the first time in 800 years, the Dragon Emperor wept. The news of Maya's appointment spread through the palace like wildfire, reaching every corner where dragons gathered to discuss the unprecedented decision. In the noble quarters, heated arguments raged behind closed doors as the great families debated what this meant for the established order. A human had been elevated above her station, given authority over treasures that represented the very foundation of dragon civilization. Count Drakmor paced the length of his private chambers, his silver scales catching the light as he moved. Around him, other influential nobles sat in carefully arranged positions that spoke of conspiracy and shared purpose. The Emperor's decision had shaken them all, but Drakmor had been the first to see the true danger it represented. "This cannot stand," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of 6 centuries of noble lineage. "If we allow one human to rise above her proper place, others will follow. Soon they will demand equality, then dominance. We will become servants in our own empire." Lady Korath nodded her massive head, her dark eyes glowing with anger. "The Emperor has been bewitched by this creature's strange magic. How else can we explain his tears? Dragons do not weep for lesser beings." "It's worse than that," Duke Viridian interjected, his green scales darkening with emotion. "She has made him question our very nature. I saw how he looked at his own treasures after her explanations. He sees them differently now, sees us differently. This human has poisoned his mind against his own kind." The gathered nobles murmured agreement, their voices creating a rumble like distant thunder. They had spent lifetimes building their positions of power, accumulating wealth and influence through careful political maneuvering. The idea that a human servant could bypass all of that simply by demonstrating knowledge and integrity was intolerable. "What do you propose we do?" Lord Malthorn asked, his ancient voice carrying the weight of tradition. "The Emperor has made his decision public. To challenge it directly would be treason." Count Drakmor's eyes glittered with cunning. "We don't challenge the Emperor. We challenge the human. Traditional law is clear about humans who touch sacred artifacts without permission. The penalty is death, regardless of any subsequent appointments or honors." "But she had permission," Lady Korath protested. "The Emperor left the vault open for her." "Did he?" Drakmore's voice took on a silky tone. "The Emperor says he was testing her, but we have only his word for that. Perhaps the human used some form of coercion or manipulation. Perhaps she threatened other servants or found some way to compromise the vault's security. There are many possible explanations for what happened." The other nobles considered this carefully. In dragon law, accusations of coercion or manipulation were serious charges that required formal investigation. If they could raise enough doubt about Maya's innocence, they could demand a tribunal regardless of the Emperor's wishes. Duke Viridian leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Even if we cannot prove wrongdoing, we can demand that she demonstrate her worthiness through trial by combat. No human has ever survived such a test. The Emperor would be forced to agree or appear to show favoritism." "Perfect," Drakmore hissed. "We present it as a matter of honor and tradition. The human has claimed a position of authority over dragon heritage. Let her prove she deserves it by defending herself as any dragon would." The conspiracy was refined over several hours of discussion. They would present their demands publicly during the next court session, framing their challenge in terms of protecting ancient traditions and ensuring that positions of responsibility were held only by those who could defend them. The Emperor would be forced to choose between appearing weak and allowing Maya to face certain death. Maya, meanwhile, had spent her first days as keeper of the Imperial collection in a state of wonder. The appointment had given her access not just to the Emperor's personal vault, but to the entire palace treasury. Room after room contained artifacts, artworks, and historical objects from across the galaxy, most of them stored haphazardly or arranged purely for the convenience of dragon-sized beings. She worked with careful enthusiasm, cataloging items and creating preliminary plans for better organization. Many pieces required research to understand their significance, and she found herself spending hours in the palace archives, learning about civilizations that had flourished and faded long before humanity had discovered fire. Emperor Thaxion visited regularly, initially to check on her progress, but increasingly because he enjoyed their conversations. Maya's perspective on history and culture was unlike anything he had encountered. Where he saw conquest and acquisition, she saw artistic evolution and cultural exchange. Where he remembered political significance, she found human stories of creativity and craftsmanship. "This tapestry," Maya said during one of his visits, gesturing to a massive wall hanging that depicted a space battle, "tells the story of your victory over the Centaurian fleet. But look at the weaving technique." She pointed to subtle details in the fabric. The artist used traditional Centaurian methods to create it. This wasn't made by the victors to celebrate conquest. This was made by the defeated to honor fallen warriors. Thaxion studied the tapestry with new eyes. He had always seen it as a tribute to his military prowess, but Maya's analysis revealed it as something far more complex and moving. The defeated had created beauty from tragedy, honoring their dead while acknowledging their defeat. Such conversations had become precious to him. For the first time in centuries, he was learning rather than simply commanding. Maya's knowledge opened new ways of understanding not just his collection, but the civilizations that had created the objects within it. This made the events of the court session even more painful. Count Drakmore rose before the assembled nobles, his formal posture indicating that he was about to make an official challenge. "Your Imperial Majesty," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the Great Hall, "we come before you with concerns about recent appointments that affect the security and honor of our realm." Thaxion felt his heart sink as he realized what was coming. He had hoped the nobles would accept Maya's appointment, but their expressions told him that resistance had been building during the past weeks. "The human Maya has been given authority over our most sacred treasures," Drakmore continued. "But this appointment was made without following traditional protocols. We request that she prove her worthiness through the ancient rites of challenge." "What specific challenge do you propose?" Thaxion asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Trial by combat, Lady Korath declared, rising to her full intimidating height. If this human truly deserves to oversee dragon heritage, let her defend that position as any dragon would. Let her face a champion of our choosing in honorable battle. The hall erupted in roars of approval from many of the nobles. Trial by combat was an ancient tradition, almost never invoked in modern times, but still technically valid under dragon law. No human had ever survived such a challenge, which was precisely why they had chosen it. Thaxion looked across the hall to where Maya stood among the palace staff. Her face was pale but calm, and she met his eyes without flinching. In that moment, he saw the same quiet dignity she had shown when organizing his treasures, the same courage she had displayed when facing accusations in this very hall. Maya of Earth, he said formally, you have heard the challenge. How do you respond? Maya stepped forward, her small form dwarfed by the massive dragons surrounding her. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. I accept the challenge, Your Majesty, but I request the right to choose the nature of the combat. A murmur of surprise ran through the assembly. This was an obscure provision in the ancient laws, rarely invoked but technically valid. What form of combat do you choose? Count Drakmor asked, clearly caught off guard by her response. Maya looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of dragons who moments before had been calling for her death. When she spoke, her words carried a weight that surprised everyone present. I choose a battle of knowledge. Let your champion face me in demonstrating understanding of the cultural and historical significance of items in the Imperial collection. Let us see who truly honors these treasures by comprehending their meaning. The hall fell silent. No one had expected this response. Maya had transformed what should have been a physical confrontation into an intellectual challenge, one that played to her strengths while highlighting the real question at stake. Who was better qualified to care for the Empire's cultural heritage? Count Drakmor's scales darkened with anger, but he could not refuse without appearing to concede that knowledge was less important than strength. Very well, he hissed. I will serve as champion myself. We will meet in 3 days' time. As the court session ended and the nobles dispersed, Thaxion approached Maya. He found her examining a small sculpture in one of the display alcoves, her fingers tracing its carved surface with gentle precision. Are you certain about this? He asked, quietly. Drakmor has had centuries to study our history. He may know more than you realize. Maya looked up at him with a smile that was both sad and determined. Your Majesty, I may not know as much about dragon history as he does, but I know something he doesn't. What is that? I know the difference between memorizing facts and understanding their meaning. I know the difference between owning beautiful things and truly seeing their beauty. And I know that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you. Emperor Thaxion felt that familiar tightness in his chest as he looked down at this remarkable human. In 3 days, she would face a challenge that could cost her everything, and she was spending her time not in preparation or fear, but in continuing to care for the treasures she had been appointed to protect. For the first time since becoming emperor, Thaxion found himself praying to the ancient dragon gods, not for victory in battle or expansion of territory, but for the safety of a single small human who had taught him to see beauty with new eyes. The Great Hall had been transformed for the challenge, with display cases brought from various parts of the palace to create a makeshift testing ground. Artifacts from dozens of civilizations gleamed under the crystal dome, representing thousands of years of galactic history. The assembled dragon nobles formed a circle around the displays, their massive forms creating walls of scales and anticipation. Maya stood at one end of the hall, wearing the simple work dress she had arrived in 3 months earlier. She had refused offers of ceremonial robes or formal attire. saying she preferred to face the challenge as herself. Across from her, Count Drakmor gleamed in polished ceremonial armor, his silver scales catching the light as he moved. Emperor. Thaxion occupied his throne, but his usual air of detached authority was absent. His claws gripped the armrests tightly, and his golden eyes never left Maya's small form. The past 3 days had been difficult for him as he watched preparations for a challenge that could cost him the most interesting companion he had found in centuries. "The rules are simple," announced the court chancellor, an ancient dragon whose voice carried the weight of tradition. "Each challenger will be presented with artifacts from the Imperial collection. They must identify the object, its origin, its cultural significance, and its proper method of preservation. The challenge continues until one participant fails to provide adequate answers." Count Drakmor stepped forward, his confidence evident in every movement. "I have studied dragon history for 6 centuries, he declared. "I have memorized the genealogies of 1,000 noble houses and can recite the details of every major battle in our empire's expansion. This human may have impressed some with her simple arrangements, but true knowledge requires time and dedication that her brief life cannot provide." Maya said nothing in response, simply nodding respectfully to acknowledge his words. Her calm demeanor seemed to irritate several nobles, who had expected her to show more fear or at least attempt to match Drakmor's boasting. The first artifact was brought forward, a crystalline sculpture that seemed to capture starlight within its faceted surface. The Chancellor gestured to Count Drakmor to begin. "This is the prism of eternal sorrow," Drakmor said immediately. "Created by the Lyrian artists before their homeworld was consumed by their dying star. It represents the final artistic achievement of their civilization, carved from the compressed carbon of their ancient forests." His answer was technically correct, and the nobles murmured approval. Drakmor's knowledge was indeed extensive, and he had delivered the information with the confidence of long study. Maya approached the sculpture, but instead of reciting facts, she began to examine it more closely. She walked around it, studying how the light played through its internal structure, noting details that others had missed. "Count Drakmor is correct about its origin and materials," she said finally. "But he's missed something important. This isn't just a sculpture about sorrow. Look at the internal patterns." She pointed to subtle variations in the crystal's structure. "The Lyrians embedded actual preserved pollen from their dying forests within the crystal matrix. This isn't just art representing their loss. It's a seed bank." The hall fell silent as the implications sank in. Maya continued, her voice growing more passionate as she spoke. "They weren't just creating a memorial to their dying world, they were preserving the genetic material of their forests for future generations. If this crystal were properly analyzed and the pollen extracted, it might be possible to restore Lyrian plant life on other worlds. This isn't just art, it's hope." Emperor Thaxion leaned forward on his throne. In all the centuries the crystal had been in his collection, no one had realized its true significance. Maya had not only identified it correctly, but had discovered a layer of meaning that transformed it from a beautiful curiosity into something revolutionary. The second artifact was a set of metallic rings covered in intricate engravings. Drakmor identified them as Centaurian navigation tools, explaining their use in early space exploration. Again, his answer was accurate, but limited to basic historical facts. Maya studied the rings carefully, running her fingers along the engravings, with the practiced touch of someone who understood craftsmanship. "These are navigation tools," she agreed, "but they're also something else. These aren't just mathematical calculations for stellar navigation. They're poetry." She held up one of the rings, pointing to specific symbols. The Centaurians encoded their epic poems into their navigation equipment. Every calculation needed, For space travel was also a line of verse about the beauty of the cosmos, the longing for home, or the courage required for exploration. They turned the cold mathematics of survival into art. As the challenge continued, a pattern emerged. Count Drakmore possessed encyclopedic knowledge of facts and dates, but Maya understood the deeper meaning behind the objects. Where he saw historical artifacts, she saw the human stories they contained. Where he recited classifications and categories, she revealed connections and purposes that had been lost to time. The turning point came with the seventh artifact, a simple wooden bowl that looked unremarkable compared to the glittering treasures around it. Drakmore dismissed it quickly as a common eating vessel from some primitive world, probably kept in the collection by mistake. Maya picked up the bowl with reverence, her eyes bright with recognition. "This isn't primitive at all," she said softly. "This is from Earth. From my Earth." Her voice caught slightly as she continued. "This is a mixing bowl, used for making bread. But not just any bread. Look at the wear patterns on the inner surface, the specific staining from ingredients." She cradled the bowl as if it were made of precious metal rather than simple wood. This bowl was used to make communion bread for religious ceremonies. For hundreds, maybe thousands of meals, families gathered around bread made in this bowl. It connected people to their faith, their community, their ancestors who used similar bowls for the same purpose. Tears began to flow down Maya's cheeks as she spoke, but her voice remained steady. "You keep this in your collection, not because it's rare or valuable, but because it represents something invaluable. The human capacity to find the sacred in the ordinary, to transform simple acts, like sharing food, into expressions of love and faith and community." The great hall was completely silent now. Even the nobles who had opposed Maya's appointment found themselves moved by her words. She had transformed a piece of carved wood into a window into the human soul. Count Drakmore stepped forward, his confidence beginning to crack. "It's still just a bowl," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maya looked up at him with compassion rather than anger. "Yes, it's just a bowl. Just like the Lyrian crystal is just a sculpture, and the Centaurian rings are just navigation tools. But just doesn't capture their real meaning. These objects are vessels for hope, for beauty, for the dreams and fears and loves of the beings who created them." She set the bowl down carefully and addressed the assembled court. "I don't know as many facts as Count Drakmore. I haven't studied for centuries or memorized genealogies. But I know something else. I know that every object in this collection represents someone's attempt to create meaning from existence, to leave something beautiful or useful or important for future generations." Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued. "That's what makes these treasures worth preserving, not their monetary value or their rarity, but their capacity to connect us to the experiences of others across time and space. When we truly understand that we don't just collect these objects, we honor them." Emperor Thaxion rose from his throne, his massive form casting shadows across the hall. For a moment, everyone thought he was going to declare the challenge complete. Instead, he did something unprecedented. He knelt. The sight of the Dragon Emperor kneeling before a human servant sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles. Gasps and roars of disbelief echoed through the hall, but Thaxion ignored them all. "Maya of Earth," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have won more than a challenge today. You have won understanding. You have shown us the difference between knowing about something and truly knowing it." He looked up at her, and Maya saw that tears were flowing freely down his scaled cheeks. "I tested you to learn what humans were. Instead, you taught me what I could become. You showed me that strength is not just the power to take, but the wisdom to understand what is worth taking. That true wealth is not in possessing beautiful things, but in being able to see their beauty." Maya knelt as well, bringing herself to his eye level. Your Majesty, you gave me the greatest gift possible. You let me do what I love most, caring for beautiful and important things. You let me share that love with others. Thank you. The Emperor reached out with one massive claw and gently touched Maya's cheek, wiping away her tears. No, Maya, thank you. For teaching an old dragon to weep, for showing me that tears are not weakness, but recognition of beauty so profound. It overwhelms the heart. Count Drakmor and the other nobles watched in stunned silence as their emperor wept openly in the presence of a human servant. But as they looked around the hall at the artifacts Maya had interpreted for them, they began to understand what Thaxion had learned. These were not just trophies of conquest or symbols of wealth. They were fragments of souls, pieces of civilizations, that had poured their hopes and dreams and deepest beliefs into objects that would outlast their creators. Maya had not just cataloged and arranged them, she had given them voices to speak across the centuries. In the days that followed, the palace began to change. Nobles who had demanded Maya's execution found themselves asking her to explain other pieces in their private collections. The Imperial Museum, as it came to be known, became a place of pilgrimage where beings from across the galaxy came to see their heritage displayed with understanding and reverence. Maya worked alongside Emperor Thaxion, no longer as servant and master but as partners in discovering the stories hidden within their vast collection. She taught him to see with new eyes, while he shared the historical context that gave her insights deeper meaning. And sometimes, when they discovered something particularly beautiful or moving, they would both weep together. Not from sadness, but from joy at recognizing the infinite capacity of conscious beings to create meaning from existence, to transform the ordinary into the sacred, and to leave gifts of beauty for future generations to discover. The Dragon Emperor had learned the most important lesson of his long life. The greatest treasures were not those you could possess, but those you could truly understand. And the greatest gift was not power over others, but the ability to help them see beauty they had never noticed before. Maya had indeed left him in tears, but they were tears of gratitude for showing him that in a universe full of wonders, the greatest wonder of all was the capacity to recognize wonder itself.